Do you want to help shape the next generation of boys to become well-rounded young men? Good evening, and welcome to the second of our Bedrock interviews, where we sit down with our contributors over a cup of tea and get to know them a bit. Tonight we're joined by Tom Candia, who wrote a fascinating article for our March issue about his experiences in helping to lead a boys' club and what they taught him about how we can all help boys to grow. Just a reminder that you can still pick up our March issue by subscribing on our website. Just make sure you do it quickly because our June issue is just about to be released. So make sure you subscribe today to get both of those. Okay, so Tom, good evening. Great to have you on the show.
Good evening.
Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, and how did you get into working with young men?
Great, thank you, Alex. So my name's Thomas Candia. I've been contributing to youth work for the last just under 10 years now in a club called Kelston Club and Study Centre. And I run weekly activities, camps, retreats, and most importantly, one-on-one mentoring with boys from age 8 to 18. And I've been involved with that for the last 10 years. And professionally, I also work as a school manager. And I initially got involved with Kelston because a mentor of mine at the time, who was the director of the youth club, thought it would be a very wise thing, or at least a good thing for me at that time, to get involved with at least volunteering with some aspects of the youth club. And it certainly did help me. And I'd love to share some of those experiences later on. At that moment in time, you know, I was a bit young guy. I was very happy to help out, you know, lead a game of football, whatever it may have been, and contribute in my way at that time. But now that I have been dedicated to this cause, let's say, for a while now, I have seen more than ever such a great need to form young men, and that's kind of the thing that really keeps me going. So yeah, that's sort of I'd say a little introduction.
So you got the sort of preview of almost like in your own experience of how valuable it was for yourself before you. That's very beautiful. I mean, you say about this kind of great need of forming young men, and obviously it's a lot of kind of time and effort to be dedicating yourself to sort of helping out with this kind of thing. You know, giving up every Saturday afternoon and evening to. How would you? Where do you think the need lies? Why do you think there is such a need? Why should anybody do this?
Because if we don't form young men, then I think someone else will. And sometimes not always in people that we trust. And I think boys are always watching. They're very, at their stage in their life, they're very easy to mould with their ideas, and they see everything. They really see everything. And it's almost like they don't know it, but they want an example of someone older than them. And my fear is that if we do not take the responsibility to form young boys, then someone else will. Someone that we don't know, someone that we don't trust, someone that is not grounded in solid ideas, someone that is not going to help these young boys who are going to be future fathers, future owners of companies. We're leaving it in their hands if we don't do anything. And so we have a huge responsibility to help these boys have big ideals, because if not, as I said, it's going to be in the hands of others.
Yeah. And I mean, lots of people are kind of talking about this in terms of the internet, the role the internet has in shaping young people, kind of maybe positively, but also lots of negative influences there as well. There's a thing that came out a couple of months ago, I don't know if you saw it, called the Lost Boys Report, which was published by some kind of London think tank, which sort of talked about this generation of lost boys who really just haven't been getting this kind of formation, or Sir Gareth Southgate kind of speaking about sort of the importance of sport in that. So like lots of people are kind of talking about this right now. It's quite a topical thing, but not many people seem to know what this actually involves. How do we kind of present an alternative? And what do you think in terms of the sort of the more kind of nitty-gritty practical on the ground stuff? Like how do we form young men in a better way than we're doing right now?
Forming young men, as any parent would know, is obviously very tricky, because I think the two main components are, first of all, you have to lead by example. And that is the trickiest thing. It's the trickiest thing in the world, because you're a father, you get home, you're tired, you've had a rubbish day at work, and you get home and your wife is maybe not in the best mood, and your kids are running around and they're not doing their homework, and they're not helping their mother. But in those moments, you have to lead by example, and it can be the toughest thing in the world. But then I think the second component of forming young men is also then encouraging them, which I think we do not do a great deal of that nowadays. Just being able to, first of all, lead by example and then encourage. It's honestly, it's one of the trickiest things in the world. It takes so much effort and patience, and I fear that, you know, one thing that I was going to touch on maybe later, but I can mention it now, is this whole idea of being friends with young boys. I see it very often, not just within my professional work, but also in the youth club. I think people also, they want to be liked. It's a natural, it's a human instinct to be liked. But with boys, we need to have a very deep sense of wanting them to be better. And that sometimes comes at the cost of them liking us. This happened, I was going to mention this later. It's sort of a short anecdote, but one boy who I was mentoring years ago, I said to him, let's call him James. James, and this boy had, you know, he was sort of coasting through life, but I saw that he was very proud. And he would always speak about himself. And he got very wound up when other people would do better than him, even in sports, in football games, in school, all these things. And I really wanted this boy to be better, to give him a solid foundation to be a man. And so in one of our mentoring sessions, I said to him, James, this might sound as a tough thing to say, but I'm sure no one else is going to tell you. But I really mean this from the depths of my soul. But I think you can sometimes be very proud. Anyway, I won't go into everything, but I mentioned a few more ideas. The next day, James comes to me and he says, Tom, I don't want to be mentored by you anymore. And I said, of course, I respect your freedom. That's fine. A month passed. It was 4, 5, 6 weeks that passed. And James came back to me and he said, Tom, I want to be mentored again. And he sort of, you know, opened up, and maybe I don't have to repeat everything that was said. But the main idea is that he was so touched by the fact that there was someone who was just willing to correct him. And in that moment, I'm putting my, you know, what he thinks of me kind of at jeopardy, because I'm saying, but deep down, it's that I have to tell this guy, I have to. I could give many this happens quite a lot, because obviously boys aren't perfect, no one's perfect, but they need someone to kind of just help them. We don't have to like force anything on them necessarily, but just to have, you know, just that, you know, like a plant that grows around a stick, just have something to guide them a bit. And they'll grow at their own pace, depending on the situation, depending on their family experience, whatever it may be. But I think a key, sort of wrapping up that idea, I think, first of all, we have to lead by example, which is the trickiest thing. Then encourage boys a lot, and tell them that they're doing, you know, good things, that they, you know, give them bigger ideals. But then also, we shouldn't be afraid that, you know, we shouldn't think, oh, I always have to be liked, because that's not what love is really. And I guess especially in the context of kind of encouragement, if you have a general sort of culture of we're going to help these boys really kind of get a sense of self-worth, that's where kind of criticism can be sort of appropriate, and can show them that you're not doing that because you have a thing for you go against them, you don't like them. It's because you actually want to help them grow, right? And on this point, actually, sorry to interject.
No, go for it.
My brother, who's also involved with the youth club, we love formulas, we love things that work, and we love identifying these patterns. And we don't have an exact number, but we know that there is a ratio between encouragement and correction. And we have found that when it's too much correction, so for example, in a youth club, you might have a boy that starts, you know, doing something out of order or start jumping on the sofa. If the relationship between you and that boy is always correction, then he will just think that you're picking on him. Boys have a very strong sense of justice, and they'll be like, well, he always picks on me, he's like, it's unfair. But then, as I said, I don't know what the exact number is, but a certain amount of encouragements makes those corrections so much more powerful, because then that boy, as you say, he knows that we're doing it, that we really believe in him, that we want him to be better. And I've only ever found that to be a great way to build respect, but also a very powerful way for boys to learn from their mistakes. That they know that you've encouraged them. You don't have to be patronising, of course, but you know, really good in this thing. In the mentoring sessions, you know, they get an A star in their exam. Oh, that's really good. If the relationship is sort of built off that, and then they start jumping on the sofa, you say, oh, you know, Bob, John, whatever your name is, you know, like we don't do that here, or like that's not the standard. then it's very powerful.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No, definitely, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I think intuitively maybe we can also kind of see how that would be something that we would respond well to. Maybe there's a kind of empathy there that actually, what would I respond well to if someone said that to me, right?
Yeah.
If they're encouraging me, but then they kind of give me a point of criticism, you sort of think, well, that will help me to grow. Okay, I'd like to kind of get into the sort of maybe the 4 key kind of themes that you cover in your article, which I thought were very interesting, and maybe gave us a bit of an insight into sort of your experiences in the Boys Club. And maybe if you could kind of flesh them out a little bit and sort of explain what you mean by them. The first thing you talked a lot about was this idea of discipline, the fact that one of the kind of key elements of forming young men is helping them to be like really, really disciplined, kind of, and elements of order there as well, and so on. Why do you think this is so important, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I think discipline gets a bit of a bad representation.
Mm-hmm.
The connotation might be, discipline, like stuff like no emotions,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really think that's what discipline is.
Mm-hmm.
I think discipline at its core is the ability to govern oneself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is very powerful if we can help our boys instill this idea of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And as we'll explore later, one thing I mentioned in my article is the whole idea of service, of giving oneself. And that ultimately is what gives meaning to all these other things, discipline and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Because discipline in itself, to tell a boy, just be very disciplined. You think, okay, well then it's very self-centered.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes an act so much more honourable is if they can be disciplined for other people, typically with fathers, and I'm sure we'll explore this idea later.
Yeah.
But going back to discipline also gives freedom, which might sound a bit counterintuitive, but if we allow boys to live at the mercy of their whims, for example, I never want to help, I don't want to do my homework, I don't want to do this, no, it's always no.
Yeah.
If we allow them to follow that path, then they'll get used to saying no, and it's so hard to say yes.
Yeah.
And we may experience this in our own lives as adults, but if we allow boys to say yes and be disciplined and govern themselves, then they really have freedom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you are more free the more good you choose, let's say. There's that old adage, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And I feel like that's a principle that kind of surrounds discipline. It's not supposed to be, no emotion, but more actually, let's give boys the freedom to do good, to control themselves, to allow themselves to put their own needs, wants, desires aside, so that, for example, when they're forming a family, you have to give up all your time, all your money, all your ideas. You want to go on that nice holiday.
Yeah.
Those moments, discipline becomes very important. Yeah. And so I think discipline is something that, as I said, might get a bit of a bad representation, but it's very important that boys, that they can be order in their life. And ultimately to give them freedom to govern themselves.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, kind of the linking of discipline and freedom might not be something that people kind of instinctively sort of think about, but actually, I guess we've all had that experience of, if we don't set boundaries for ourselves, if we, I don't know, the classic, spending too much time on your phone or eating too much or whatever, you don't set boundaries for yourself, you find you become a slave to something, right? And I guess it's the same with boys who are much more susceptible. You need to kind of help them have those boundaries to give them that freedom. I guess kind of tied into this is this idea of sort of character and helping to form their characters, making them actually kind of like good people, not just kind of disciplined people, but sort of moral characters with integrity. What kind of role does that play in the way you kind of look at forming boys?
I think integrity is very important for boys. And also maybe it's worth mentioning that I'm sure a lot of these ideas are also applicable to girls, but my experience lies in, maybe it's worth prefacing what I'm going to say with saying that I'm sure a lot of these ideas apply to girls. But as I said, my experience lies with boys. But I think integrity is important for boys because it gives them, it really gives them a certain unity of life. Because we want boys to act the same way when they're with their friends, when they're at school, when they're with their parents, when they're with other relatives or friends outside of school, friends inside of school, different friendship groups. With integrity, we want boys to act the same way all the time. and that will show their character.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, character is who you are when no one is looking. It's a very sort of commonly used idea. But how are you when you're by yourself? What do you think? What do you do? More importantly, and integrity gives boys this unity of life, if I could call it that. Is that they will act the same in every situation of their life. And this is very important because, well, for many reasons, if, for example, you would expect a good father, to act the same way with his wife, with his kids, with his people at work. And so when, for example, hardships might come at work, you might feel, just as an example, but, oh, that woman really understands me at work. My wife, she's always asking me to do stuff, but that woman, she really understands, she gets me. And then maybe temptations arise. Integrity is important at that point because I've chosen my life. There's a certain unity of life, and this comes from integrity. Also stems from this idea of like a mission, is that I've committed to something. I have a high ideal. For a father, that would be forming a family and loving his wife very, very faithfully. And so integrity gives boys this certain sense of so much confidence. Obviously, another big discussion nowadays is this whole idea of confidence. And having a boy who lives integrity means that he's solid in his ideals. And this is very powerful because it also means when you have bad role models come along, they know that this is not the ideal that they've committed to. So integrity is very important in this regard. And I think it's one of those things that boys need to see.
Right.
So it's not just a matter of like teaching them, knowing the theory, but I think they need to see it in their role models and their parents.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about mentoring, and more specifically with like how can we help boys to be to like learn from example.
Yeah.
And I think part of mentoring is also having the ability to open up. Boys no one connects with perfection. They connect with humanity.
Yeah.
You see people online that present these perfect lifestyles. I've got this amount of cars, and in my opinion, that is not a perfect lifestyle. But that aside, they present a perfect lifestyle, but no one connects with perfection because no one is perfect. Yeah. So part of this, I was getting with the idea of showing boys an example of integrity. This happened once when I was mentoring a boy. He came to me and said, "Tom, you look really tired." And I thought, well, there are three options here. I could either say, stiff upper lip, no, the mentoring's about this boy, just get on with it, I'm fine. I could sort of start to, unburden everything and, and I think that's very irresponsible because young people should not have the weight of our problems. But I think there is a fine balance because then what I ended up saying to that boy, I said, look, it's been a really long week, and I'm tired and I didn't have the best night's sleep. And that's so powerful because then a boy, which is inevitable, every human knows that they're going to have setbacks. They know they're going to have tough weeks. When a boy has those, he knows how to respond. Because if he has a role model to say, okay, this guy was tired. He's not a perfect human being, but he responded in this way, and he was still cheerful. He was still willing to serve others. I think that's very important. So just to sort of maybe finish with the idea of integrity is that boys kind of need to see it.
I guess it's that kind of leading by example, coming back and sort of to go maybe kind of slightly off track away. We'll come back to the other two in a moment. But one thing you're kind of mentioning a lot is this idea of fatherhood, both in terms of the role that kind of parents obviously have in terms of forming boys, which is hopefully a fairly sort of fairly obvious one. They're the ones who are doing the forming first and foremost. But also this idea that, in a sense, a lot of the examples you give are of the way that you're forming these boys to be better fathers in the long term, or is that as one of the options, but maybe sort of one of the more obvious kind of ways that they will live out their manhood, right? What role do you think that has to play, kind of maybe more consciously, in terms of how you look at the kind of task of forming young boys? Do you feel like you're forming them for fatherhood, or is that more of an unconscious thing?
So this is a very interesting idea. First of all, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but we've mentioned formation. maybe this term isn't so commonly used, so it could be worth sort of ironing that out. And ultimately, information as opposed to information, formation is the form, quite literally, that boys take. So there is a difference between knowing what humility is and being humble. There is a difference between knowing what honesty is, or sincerity, and being honest or sincere. And so what we're trying to do with formation, with forming boys, is not just ideas, but action, deeds. And so going back to this idea of fatherhood, yes, many people, I mean, most people are going to become fathers. But besides that, and obviously, as you said, you know, parents are the primary educators, they'll be the ones who have the most impact in their children's lives. So that's a big part of it. But even if you're not a father, you're still a son, you're still a brother, you're still a friend, you're still maybe a manager at work, and the same ideas apply. Because formation isn't just about, when they become a father, but formation is about acts, it's about deeds, it's about how you hold yourself every day, like every act that you do, and the way that you treat your employees or your colleagues, it all matters. And this is the backbone of changing a society, or how, you know, how people should interact in a society. It's very powerful from that point of view, because you can form young men and it will benefit society. Maybe not, if they might not become fathers, but they certainly will still hold a place in society, which they can help many other people.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess that sort of makes it much more like this kind of formation is for everyone, not just for these sort of specific specific boys. Okay. All right, let's go back to the kind of so we talked about discipline, we've talked about kind of integrity and character. The third thing you mentioned in your article as kind of a key maybe aspect of formation is this idea of resilience and helping boys to become resilient. What does that look like? Tell us a bit about that.
Resilience is essentially the ability to overcome setbacks in its sort of rawest form. And this is also it's tied in a lot with discipline and integrity, because we have setbacks in life, and everyone will have these. And empowering boys to say, you know, treat these setbacks as they should be treated. I found in my experience that there are three types of boys. There was a boy who got 10% on his maths exam, a younger boy in the youth club. Anyway, so I won't go into the ins and outs, but what I learned with that particular boy is that there are three types of boy in this regard. Ones that will see an outcome and say, well, this is who I am. I've got 10%. I'm never gonna. I can't do well. You have another outcome. You have another type of boy that they have an outcome, and they're very laissez-faire. It's like, well, I don't even care anyway. They kind of act like, you know. But then you have a boy who is maybe a bit more resilient, or understands this idea a bit better, which is understanding the outcome at its face value. So, okay, I have failed in X thing in this exam. It's my responsibility. You know, it's not that my parents haven't sent me to a good enough school. Like, I have not studied. So it's first of all identifying what the problem is, and that's the beginning of resilience. But then it's also overcoming that and saying, how am I going to overcome this? Not just ideas, but deeds. Going back to the whole idea of formation. What am I going to do to change this outcome? And so ultimately, we want all our young people to be that third type, people that will have setbacks and say, okay, let me identify what's happened. I don't need to. We should not ever take things out of proportion. And this is something I sometimes do in mentoring, when they say, you know, this thing and blah 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 blah, and I kind of sit there and I'm like, okay, and they kind of, you know, like double take, like kind of expecting a big reaction, like, oh my gosh. But I think it's good that we also give them that confidence. It's like, you are going to have setbacks, and that's fine. You know, so I think we want to try and help young people to be resilient, understand the outcomes, but then also give them ideas, give them the ability to think, okay, well, how am I going to overcome this? What can I do? It's my responsibility to overcome this thing. Because as we all know, as adults, we will have setbacks in our life. And
I guess then again you can come back to sort of leading by example, and similar to the sort of whole tiredness thing, whatever these boys then see in the adults around them, how they respond to setbacks is what they'll then kind of imitate. Right? So great. And then sort of finally, this thing which maybe kind of ties everything else together is you talk a lot about this idea of service, and in particular kind of instilling a sense of service to others. in the whole kind of fabric of formation. Why is this kind of sense of service important, and how do we help these boys to grow in their spirit of service?
If we do not have service at the core of formation, then all these other things, discipline, resilience, integrity, become self-centered. So it's always for them. It's like, young man, be disciplined because, for your own good. There is something in that. Live integrity, be resilient for your own good. As I said, there's something in that. But it is, in my opinion, the most honorable thing when you take those things that you've learned with all that formation and you give it, and it's complete self-giving. As I've mentioned, as you said many times, fatherhood, but it's the first example that I come back to. Because if a father is just disciplined in his own right, just for himself, okay, he has the ability to govern himself, he can say no. But then if he doesn't give that to his family, to his wife, to his kids, there's something a bit empty about that. And so service brings everything together. It's a complete self-giving, and that means, as I said, giving of your time, your ideas, your money, especially as a father. And so this is going back to this whole idea of formation and helping other people be better. The idea of service is at the core of this. Because if people understand this idea, then they're willing to give themselves fully to help the next boy, to help their colleague, to help even their boss or their whoever in their company or their family. Then it makes sense. Because if not, it's just for yourself. And it's like, well, I'm disciplined. I'm resilient. It's like, okay, that's good. I feel very. It's a genuinely good thing. But it's so much more honourable to give your life, to completely give your life unconditionally to other people in this sense, with the abilities that you have. It's so honourable. And I greatly admire many people in this regard. But for this reason, is that they have given their lives. They could have, that's the thing, these people, precisely these people who are disciplined, who have very good ideas, who are very hardworking, they can achieve great things, humanly speaking. Yet they decide to give it. And it's admirable. And I think we have to really try and adopt this idea of service. And then you said, well, how do we help young boys develop this sense? And once again, this example. Boys are always looking. It's amazing. The amount of times that boys have mentioned things like, oh, like, thank you for this thing, or I noticed you did. And I'm like, oh gosh, like, this is, they're always watching. They are inside begging for an example of someone who can give themselves.
Maybe that's the blind spot, is that they don't have that aspect of service. Do you think those things are still kind of valuable, or do you think they kind of, the service is so fundamental to the formation that you can't really do without it?
It is, because as we said before, if you read a book, you might get a few ideas. It might stay as information. It might concretize in formation, so you might change the way you're acting. But I've only ever found in my experience that by seeing an example of someone that is a role model, so not someone that is perfect, but someone that is very human. But also another idea about being role models is that they have to be consistent.
Right.
And the best role models are not ones that are perfect, but the ones that are consistent. And with regard to your question, we need to give boys. I completely forgot what I was about to say.
We'll cut that bit, don't worry.
Yeah, sorry. What's the question again? My mind
about like the sort of self-help, self-improvement.
Yes, that was it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, boys need a role model. First of all, because they're relatable, but also a good role model is one who is consistent. So they'll be with them all the time. A self-help book could give you a good idea, and that might concretize in formation, which is great. I'm all for that, 100%. But role models are going to be the people that will stay with you throughout your life, and if they really love you, not a romantic love, but a very deep love, meaning they want the best for you. Then they're going to help you along the way. So there's something about a human interaction, a human relationship, which you cannot replicate in a book.
But I guess that's a pretty big challenge for those of us who maybe, I think most people to some extent interact with boys and girls, with children, whether they have families of their own, whether they sort of have family friends who have families, or they work in, or like myself being a teacher, you see children all the time. I guess it's a big kind of challenge when, as you say, the most important thing is the example, cultivating the sense of service. The children are always watching, because it means that you actually have to live up to everything that you preach, which is the hardest thing.
And it's the toughest thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's the toughest thing in the world to just always be on your A game.
Yeah.
But it is the way that you form a child.
Yeah.
Because if not, they'll suss it out very quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
They suss it out. And there have been leaders that have come and gone during my time.
Yeah.
And I hear boys commenting after, like, well, that guy never did it.
Yeah.
And I really hate the narrative, like, well, I'm a leader of the youth club, so I have certain privileges. Of course, you know, there'll be some things, but we need to connect. We need to be very human. We need to connect in the boys.
Yeah.
But as I said, you know, the best role model is one who's consistent.
Yeah.
And one who leads by example and encourages.
Yeah, yeah. Great, good stuff. And then sort of maybe finally to kind of wrap it all up as we kind of start coming to a close, do you have any sort of final takeaways for our listeners who might be parents of boys, might interact with boys in some way, might be interested in helping out with a kind of boys club in their area or something like this, or starting something? How can our listeners help to form young men into the men that they should be?
If you have the opportunity to volunteer at a youth club, do it. If you are a father and you have the opportunity to help form your child, do that with a lot of perseverance and hold your children to a very high standard. If you do not have that opportunity, then as I have reiterated a few times, you have always your own example, and people always watch it. Not just young boys, but also your colleagues. So, as I said, this is obviously the world that I operate. I'm involved with the youth club and so on. But you don't just have to have a youth club to help the youth. Even, for example, one boy said to me, he was commenting on a stranger who gave up his seat for another passenger, and he got him thinking. And I thought that is a really good example of formation, because yes, that's just something that a boy will observe. But it might concretize, and with the right help, with mentors, with good parents, then that can really become formation. So yes, if you have a youth club, if you're, get involved. Those involved in education, hold the students to a very high standard. Going back to this idea of don't just be there, it's not just about being liked. Be very human, hold them to a high standards, love them deeply, love them from the point of view of wanting the best for them, which sometimes means you're saying, look, I want you to do the best, and I've got to you're destroying yourself. You're doing this thing wrong. So it's not just about getting involved. It's not just about getting involved with a youth club, even though that can be a great thing. But just your own example is so powerful. And I would say, mainly to parents, mainly to parents who carry the weight of the formation of their child. But not just parents, mainly parents, anyone involved in education, anyone involved with youth work, really persevere in what you do, be very patient, hold all these boys and girls to a very high standard, because you're not only just doing a great service to those boys and girls who cross your path, but I think you're also doing a great service to the whole of mankind.
Nice. Well, with that, thank you very much, Tom. It's been great to have you on the show. For those who would like to read Tom's article, as I said, our March issue is still being sent out, so do pick up a copy of that before our June one comes out. And it's been great to have Tom on the show. Stay tuned for future episodes as well.